In the mid-19th century, in a Russia still chained by serfdom and ruled by autocracy, there arose a man whose pen sought to ignite a transformation greater than any sword could. His name was Nikolai Chernyshevsky, a thinker, critic, and revolutionary writer who dared to ask a question that still reverberates today: what is to be done? His words were not simply ink on paper, they were sparks thrown into a field of dry grass, ready to set ablaze the minds of the oppressed and the hopeful alike. To understand Chernyshevsky's utopian vision is to enter the heart of a time when literature itself became a weapon against injustice, and when hope was sketched not on maps but in the pages of a novel. Chernyshevsky was born in 1828 in Saratov, a provincial town along the banks of the Volga River. The son of a priest, he was steeped in both religious and classical education, and from a young age he wrestled with questions of morality, justice, and the plight of the common people. Russia during his lifetime was suffocating under the weight of rigid social hierarchies. Millions of peasants were still tied to the land as serfs, and political dissent was crushed by the iron fist of the Tsarist state. For a young intellectual brimming with idealism, this was not a world to be accepted but one to be changed. That desire to transform society became the central current of his life. When Chernyshevsky moved to St. Petersburg to study at the theological seminary and later at the university, he encountered the intellectual ferment of his age: Western philosophy, socialist thought, and the radical critiques of industrial capitalism and authoritarian rule. He was particularly inspired by the French utopian socialists, like Charles Fourier and Henri de Saint-Simon, who envisioned communities based on cooperation rather than exploitation. But unlike the abstract speculations of some Western thinkers, Chernyshevsky was deeply practical. He believed ideas were not meant to decorate salons or university halls, they were tools for liberating the masses from poverty, ignorance, and oppression. His belief in the power of literature to transform society reached its peak in 1863 with the publication of his most famous work, What is to be Done? At first glance, it was a novel, a work of fiction following the lives of young idealists seeking to live by reason, equality, and moral duty. But beneath its storyline, it was a revolutionary manifesto disguised as narrative, a coded blueprint for building a new kind of society. The book's central characters embodied Chernyshevsky's ideals: selfless, rational individuals who devoted themselves to collective welfare, rejected selfishness, and sought harmony through cooperation. For Chernyshevsky, these were not just fictional heroes but prototypes for the kind of human beings who could create a just future. At the heart of his utopian vision was a belief in rational egoism, the idea that individuals, by acting in their own enlightened self-interest, would naturally support the common good. If people understood that true happiness comes from cooperation and mutual respect, not from domination or exploitation, then society could be reorganized around voluntary associations, shared labor, and fair distribution of resources. In this way, he proposed a quiet revolution, not one driven purely by violence and bloodshed, but by a moral and intellectual awakening of the masses. He saw no contradiction between individual fulfillment and communal well-being. Rather, he argued that each was impossible without the other. The impact of What is to be Done was seismic. Young radicals and reformists across Russia devoured the novel in secret, often reading it aloud in clandestine gatherings. Among those profoundly influenced by it was a young Vladimir Lenin, who later credited Chernyshevsky's novel as a key inspiration for his revolutionary worldview. To some, the book was a beacon of hope; to others, it was dangerous, subversive propaganda. The Tsarist authorities recognized the threat it posed to the old order, and Chernyshevsky paid a heavy price for his defiance. Long before the novel's publication, his political activism and writings had drawn the suspicion of the state, and in 1862 he was arrested, subjected to a humiliating show trial, and eventually sentenced to years of hard labor in Siberia followed by exile. Yet even in chains, his words continued to travel, defying prison walls and censorship. What made his vision resonate so strongly was its insistence that ordinary people, the peasants, the workers, the marginalized, were not destined to live in misery. Chernyshevsky believed that human nature, often maligned as selfish or corrupt, could be reshaped by education and just institutions. He trusted in reason as the guiding light for progress and in moral duty as the glue holding a community together. His portrayal of cooperative living arrangements, communal workshops, shared resources, and gender equality was startlingly ahead of its time. In an era when women were largely confined to domestic roles, his female characters were independent, intelligent, and equal partners in the creation of the new society. For 19th-century Russia, this was nothing short of radical. Yet Chernyshevsky's utopia was not without its critics. Some contemporaries accused him of being naive, arguing that human nature could not be so easily molded by reason and education. Others claimed his faith in rational egoism underestimated the depth of greed, ambition, and violence that often drive history. Even later thinkers, including some revolutionaries inspired by him, questioned whether his vision could survive the messy realities of power and politics. These critiques, however, do not diminish the boldness of his attempts to imagine a society founded not on coercion but on voluntary cooperation and moral duty. His dream was less about drafting a flawless blueprint and more about igniting the moral imagination of his readers. Looking back, one cannot ignore the paradox of Chernyshevsky's influence. While he envisioned a peaceful, cooperative transformation of society, his ideas helped fuel movements that would eventually lead to violent upheavals in Russia. The very novel that spoke of reason and ethical progress became an inspiration for revolutionaries who believed that only force could dismantle the old order. This tension between ideals and realities underscores the complexity of Chernyshevsky's legacy. He was a utopian thinker whose ideas helped lay the intellectual groundwork for both hope and turmoil. Beyond politics, Chernyshevsky's work raises timeless questions. Can human beings be taught to rise above selfish impulses for the greater good? Is a truly just and cooperative society achievable, or merely a noble dream? In our own era, marked by inequality, climate crises, and global conflicts, these questions remain as urgent as ever. His insistence on moral responsibility, on the power of education, and on the possibility of reshaping human character continues to challenge us to rethink how we structure our communities and our lives. The power of Chernyshevsky's utopian vision lies in its combination of idealism and practicality. He did not merely criticize the injustices of his time, he offered an alternative grounded in reason and ethical principles. His characters demonstrated that change begins with individuals who live by the values they wish to see in the world: self-restraint, solidarity, and a willingness to sacrifice for the common good. In this sense, his philosophy was not just political but deeply personal, demanding a transformation of the self as the foundation for transforming society. Even after his death in 1889, Chernyshevsky's name remained a rallying cry for reformers and intellectuals who believed in the possibility of a better world. Though many of his specific proposals have been overtaken by history, the essence of his thought endures: the conviction that reason, guided by ethics, can reshape human destiny. His life, marked by suffering and sacrifice, serves as a reminder that the struggle for justice often comes at a great personal cost. Yet his persistence also shows that ideas, once released into the world, can outlast the chains that bind their authors. Today, as we reflect on his contributions, we see that Chernyshevsky was more than a 19th-century Russian radical. He was a moral visionary who believed that the measure of any society is how it treats its most vulnerable members. His story urges us to ask ourselves hard questions. What injustices in our own time demand bold thinking and moral courage? What sacrifices are we willing to make to build a society that reflects our highest ideals? And most importantly, what is to be done, not in some distant future, but here and now? Chernyshevsky's utopian vision reminds us that progress begins in the realm of imagination. Without the courage to envision a different kind of world, we remain trapped in the status quo. His writings encourage us to dream, not as a retreat from reality, but as a first step toward transforming it. As we face the challenges of the 21st century, his voice still calls across the years, challenging us to believe that reason, compassion, and moral resolve can guide humanity toward a better future. That is why his ideas still deserve to be studied, debated, and carried forward by new generations who seek to build a more humane and just world.